Good and you, sir?
I'm okay, thanks, Jessica. I can't see him, but I think Sasha is actually having a big smile. I also just want to remove the transcript. Here on the right hand side of the screen, I'm reading myself. And I'm just going to open the chat, meeting chat. That's always better if it's the case. Hope everybody had a good weekend. That everything is well. Anything significant that happened in your life that you want to share? That's not too personal. I know the Chelsea supporters are quite quiet because they are just very matured, loyal supporters. Man United people, unfortunately, I see they haven't even joined the session yet because, I had it was hilarious this morning on the way into work. There was a recording that was sent in by obviously a very aggrieved Man United supporter. It was, and I think it was even more hilarious because it's a young boy. I think he's probably 5, 6 years old. He can't be older than that. And his response to Saturday's football game that Man United did not win, I think he was like, "Mummy, I'm very disappointed. Daddy says Man United is a," and then you can just fill in the blank spaces yourself because you're referring to the team. And I think it's just one of those that well-known South African Afrikaans word that has 3 letters, and the first and the last one is exactly the same. And I think it was more hilarious coming from a small little mouth like that because not that I condone that kind of vocabulary, but it was absolutely hilarious. And I think surmised again how people sometimes, how passionate we are about different things. And in this case, obviously, that particular sports team. Anybody else? Anything else that happened in your life that was important this weekend, or that was that you want to share with us? Welcome to. I hope everybody has enjoyed the weekend and that you are safe. You've heard that not everybody on the Bellville campus actually is 100% healthy and safe. That's why the notification went out yesterday afternoon that for the next 2 weeks there won't be campus contact sessions. For those who haven't heard, who haven't read the announcements or emails, it's not. It's just the School of Commerce. It's just the business faculty that currently have a number of individuals who are sick or in some form of isolation because of contact with people who have COVID. And the reason why the decision was taken yesterday was just to ensure that when students come to campus, the one lecturer is there, the other one is sick, or 2 others are sick, and you don't know it in advance, and secondly, you're not getting the full contact that's required, and therefore we decided to rather go online with everything for this week and next week, just to ensure that everybody gets the same kind of exposure to the learning, and that there's not people who go through trouble to get to the campus, and then there's actually their lecturer is not there, the next one is there, you're waiting for 3 periods. You know what, it's just easier. So we think of everybody that is currently not feeling well. We hope they recover quickly and that we can resume to, I'm not going to say normal because I don't think it'll ever be, but at least to a new normal. Today the session is going to be devoted to how are you going to structure your sales and your operations when you are considering to take your business abroad. And I know that it's definitely something that happens more frequently. There's no one business that starts and then says, you know what, our main objective is that we have to be in 200 countries in the next 20 years. Nobody starts off a business to go global. They want to find their feet first. They want to make sure that the business becomes sustainable It grows. It grows at a healthy rate, and then obviously, if the opportunity arises, then they would like to expand internationally. And it is difficult for some people. Some people are of the opinion that it's just impossible to do. It is tough. This chapter is devoted to identifying those aspects about international selling that is relevant for you and in your field of study and in this particular course, to address certain important aspects that you might not have any specific direct need or purpose for at the moment, but hopefully one day in future, when you are all successful and well established and are approached by your company to open a branch in a different country, where you have your own business that wants to expand internationally, some of these aspects will hopefully be evoked from your memory again, and then you'll make the right decisions. It's important for us to focus on what this module is about, and that is how to operate your sales strategies and what sales strategies is most successful when you are engaging in international trade. Right. The one thing that obviously is extremely important is that because you can be working with different people from different countries and different cultures, you will have to adapt. You will have to be able to adapt, and that's one of the first things that businesses who engage in in international trade that they look at. Would we be able to meet the variety of needs, because we are not just now catering for a market that we are used to, a market that we are comfortable with, a market that whose behavior and whose customs and cultures we understand to a large extent. We're now putting our head into a bee's nest, and so there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and therefore part of your initial planning would be to see if you'll be able to cope and adjust appropriately and sufficiently for the different practices and values and of the different cultures of the countries that you or the country that you are considering to expand to. Very often, and we'll see later in the chapter, there are some reasons why people or why businesses want to globalize their business. More about that later. For the present, we know that there's not too many countries in the world that is self-supporting. In other words, not everything that you need to service the customers in your country, you will be able to produce yourself. Very often it's because of geographical location. Some areas are just richer in certain natural resources than others. Some countries have greater access to water resources and some minerals, for instance, raw materials that's necessary in a specific manufacturing process. And as a result of that, they will obviously be better equipped in that particular field or industry. Because not all countries are equal in that regard, it opens the opportunity to import things that or international trade opens the opportunity to import those items, raw materials and foods that you need, and to export those that you have an excess of. And that's basically all reflected in the ledger called the balance of payments. In other words, all the exports or all your earnings from all your exports minus all the expenses or expenditure needed for the imports is in balance, hopefully. And ideally, it's a positive balance, so you have a trade surplus. In other words, your exports exceed your imports. In other words, you're getting more in than you actually have to import from other countries. That's a win-win situation. Obviously, it's difficult to balance. What makes it even more difficult to balance is that not all the countries in the world use the same exchange rate, and the value is not of the different currencies is also not the same. Some countries trade in dollars, others in euros, others in pounds, others in rand. We know that they're not equal value, all those currencies, and that's what makes it so much more difficult to ensure that we have a trade balance, or that our balance of payments is in balance, or at least in the green and not in the red. On the next slide, there's an example of something that solves issues. You'll find it on the website. I just captured it just to as an example to show you what it looks like. Basically, if we read that correctly, the trade surplus in 2015 was quite substantial. Okay. Right. How can you manage your trade deficit? In other words, prevent the situation where you have to import more, or what you make from your exports is less than what you have to pay for your imports. Is that obviously that you have to reduce your expenditure on your important foreign goods, and that this brings you to a point where sometimes countries decide to rather engage in developing a specific industry themselves, where maybe after they've done proper calculations, they realize that it is going to be cheaper for them to actually invest in an infrastructure, or developing an infrastructure locally and start manufacturing the products themselves, than keep on importing it from other countries. I just want to get Bonalele admitted as well. And I think that's where the challenge lies, because it's very difficult because of the exchange rate and the different currencies in which countries trade. If it fluctuates a great deal, if it's very volatile, and at the moment it's probably at the moment the position the global economy find themselves in, people tend to sit back and rather keep what they have and try and do what they have with the minimum resources that they have more efficiently, because there are trade restrictions at the moment. You don't want to import a product that's going to be in quarantine for 14 days before you can actually have access to it. And we've seen it, it's been in the news. There are many examples of these kind of restrictions that resulted in some, I think the Animal Cruelty League, or one sort of association dealing with animal cruelty, were on a case of one company who had to basically, I'm not sure if it's Spain or something, I can't recall, but I don't have all the information about it, or can't recall all information correctly, but there was a situation where between two countries importing and exporting, certain livestock got stuck, and they just couldn't they couldn't clear them to go on land, and they had to do away with many of those animals. That was actually it was sad, but it's a reality of where the world finds itself in currently. So international trade, something like a pandemic that happens, that we've experienced, that we are experiencing at the moment, that can completely kill a business. Even more so, becomes more important to prepare very thoroughly and do your research very thoroughly before you engage and expand your business globally. You can also try and sell more goods and services to overseas companies. As I said, both number one and number two at the moment is pretty much in a stalemate. Not too many people making too many moves at the moment because there's so many uncertainties. But I think most countries engage in strategies where they encourage foreign investment, and that becomes difficult, especially in developing countries that are experiencing a lot of instability in their politics. And I think that's what we currently in South Africa are experiencing. Our international rating is not that great. No company is going to invest in another country if you know that your staff working there, your factories and your buildings and everything, that the infrastructure that you've set up there is going to be endangered by unstable political or unstable politics, and that's why investors is very important for any country to not just survive but to actually to thrive. And it cannot happen, unfortunately, if there's uncertainty in the economy, if there's uncertainty in local policies, because the impact that those policies have, of different governments have on a business trading in their country is enormous. It comes at a huge cost. We'll briefly touch on it later on in today's chapter. Right, why do businesses trade internationally? There are many reasons. There are lots of reasons. More sort of industry specific and business specific examples in your textbook, but predominantly the main reasons why businesses do business with each other across borders in different countries is that they sometimes do not have a particular product available to them in their country. They do not have the raw materials that's necessary to produce a particular product, and therefore it's cheaper for them to import it than to actually start manufacturing it themselves. South Africa, if we look at the history of South Africa, apart from the fact that a very large portion of our country geographically is agricultural, we have also been known for many years for our mining, especially diamonds and gold. That's how towns like Kimberley and cities like Johannesburg started off. It is one of the motivating reasons why businesses start looking elsewhere to find products that's not available in their country. Right. Another reason is that there's differences in competitive costs. So obviously, if the import cost is less than having to produce it yourself, or the process of producing it yourself in your own country, it is better for you to import. And then obviously the reverse is true as well. If the import cost is much higher than producing it yourself, then probably you're going to stick to or you're going to focus on creating the infrastructure locally so you can actually manufacture it. And that's obviously also where you will then have a surplus in, and then you can start exporting that, because this is a international trade is a game that plays both ways. Finally, another reason is that they also trade because of product differentiations. In some specific countries, specific products, and it varies from industry to industry, is just so much better because of the skills level of the people manufacturing it, and that's why it's easier, or it's better to import that product than manufacturing parts of that of that item locally and importing the rest and putting it together in your own country. So those three main reasons have not changed a great deal over years. That's still the reason when businesses sit down and said, listen, we think we're in a position to expand our business. We are looking at expanding internationally to other countries. Then they need to tick at least one of these boxes as a justifiable motivation for doing it. Anybody, any question at this stage? Good. All still alive? All still awake? Okay. Let's resume. Now, what important factors, and there's many, but obviously, and at this point, I also want to just, we spoke about it in class, Larissa, not last week, the previous week. I think we were determining the differences between the 10th edition and the 11th, or how significant is the differences between the 10th and 11th edition of the textbook. Well, I think in conclusion, I just want to share with you and say, I have access to both. Some of you have access to one, and therefore, regardless of what edition of the textbook you use, the 10th or the 11th, the content is very similar. Sometimes the headings have changed, and sometimes the case studies have changed, the layout of the chapters have changed, and therefore chapter 180 or page 180 would be, or the same example would be on page 160 and not on 180. I would suggest that in preparation for your tests and for exam, I'm using the 11th edition. The examples that I provide is in the 11th edition. The referral to numbers, page numbers in your textbook is from the 11th edition. So I would suggest that you use your slides. I'm updating my slides on a daily basis. So the information provided on the slides are the ones that you have to prepare for assessment purposes, if I can put it that way. Is that clear to anybody? Have any issues with that, or are you still unsure? So you can use your 10th edition, you can use your 11th edition. Content-wise, it's not going to be too different. Pages will be different. The slides will be the correct updated version of the content that's important for assessment purposes. All good for that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Right. Now, culture, obviously. If you're going to another different country, then we know. Where we refer to culture as the personality of society, or also the learned behavior that reflects in the way of life, daily life, way of life of a particular community, and that we can generate from one, or that we can transmit from one generation to another. It poses a challenge for businesses who want to now trade internationally, because the cultural norms evolve over time. I'm pretty sure they are, and as a matter of fact, I think was it in consumer behavior where we used the example in the first semester about that product, that coffee cream product that was very popular in the late 70s, early 80s, Cremora. It's still on the shelves. I mean, Cremora is still used and it's still in use. But it was an iconic advertisement that was used, and everybody, almost everybody that grew up in that era, and you can ask your parents about it, know about the Cremora ad, it's not inside, it's on top commercial. Now, apparently, they have now recorded 5 new modern versions of that. The logo will still remain the same. I mean, the slogan will still stay the same. It's also still not inside, it's on top. They're using different scenarios and different people, but pretty much exactly, they've kept that, the slogan the same. But that's an example to me that although, and the reason why they've done that is because you guys can't relate to that same product. You might want to use that product, but you can't relate to it because it was still maybe used in your culture, but it's for you to relate to it now. It needs to be updated, and that is an example of how the same culture evolves over time and do change, although we pass on and transmit certain behaviors over generations. You have a different take on the same kind of behavior than a previous generation had, although you're part of the same culture. So it is important that that these changes happen and that cultural norms evolve. If we didn't, well, that's one way for us for society to sustain itself and to survive. But it makes it difficult from a selling point of view because we have, especially when you have a sales force that represents different generations, the example is used to prepare people, to prepare businesses, and especially salespeople in businesses who are considering to trade internationally, that they have to be very, very aware of these cultural differences, different value systems, as a result of the different cultures that they can expect in a new country. One of the aspects, for instance, is language. You cannot, and there's an example on page 151 of the 11th edition. I think it was page 180 in the 10th edition. Advertisements is a form in which salespeople communicate with their potential customers. Now, for instance, Pepsi-Cola started a campaign in Asia, and it was the Come Alive campaign, but it didn't have it had an opposite impact than they expected, because the ancestors in Asia, many Asians actually thought that by drinking it's going to bring the ancestors back from the dead. So you've got to be very careful in the interpretation of on how different how the language that you use for different cultures globally. You cannot have a generic approach when it comes to that. And obviously, also important that different words mean different things in different languages. For instance, if you look at the image on the screen of the Rolls-Royce, it's a Rolls-Royce silver shadow, silver mist. And mist in German refers to manure. So you know what, you've got to be careful, because the connotation that customers make with certain words are different to what you intended it to be. So it is important that when you study up on this, when you prepare your packaging and your brochures and all kinds of information related to your products that you want to share with the global market, that it's appropriate and in a particular geographical area, in a particular country, because of the different meanings that English words, which everyone would love to be an internationally acceptable language, but there are some countries that English is not the first, second, and sometimes not even the third language that the community speak, and therefore it becomes difficult. But just again, it's one of those red flags. Be aware of it, that you pay attention to how language can pose a challenge for you if you trade internationally. The aesthetics, basically referring to non-material cultural factors like culture's ideas of beauty and taste, which varies yep, from culture to culture, appreciation for colors and different forms. It's important, especially when you design your packaging and your advertising and your design of your product. It's going to be different. It's going to be experienced different in different cultures, and you have to be sensitive for the local preferences in the country that you're operating in. For instance, the example I've used there, black represents mourning in the West. It's not the same in the East. White means mourning in the East, and therefore, again, pay attention to the detail. Pay attention to the detail, and it sounds very easy. It sounds very, it sounds amazing to have your business presence in a variety of countries, but it is challenging to ensure that you, and very important that you prepare your salespeople who are going to be operating, is going to be marketing and conveying the message and trying to get customers to buy your products in a different country, to be prepared and trained properly in this. Religion obviously is also an aspect that can become a can become a hot potato, so to speak. The example that I've used there is the one of the Hindus and Islam, where Islam is very much guided, their behavior and decisions is guided by the Quran, and which basically believes that everything happens proceeds from a divine will. You have to be conscious of that fact. It makes it very difficult sometimes if you want to change products, or you sometimes are required to change products because of that. I know, for instance, that because of the Hindu religion, it was very difficult for McDonald's to open in certain parts of the world, a traditional McDonald's, because as important as families are to the Hindus, in their religion, the cow is also a sacred animal, which is not just going to go down very well if you are going to have beef patties on your menu. Religion per se is a very challenging topic, one that has to be treated over very, very carefully. You don't want religious issues to be one of the influencing factors, or the factors affecting or impacting too much on your business, and definitely a field that you have to study very carefully before you engage in international trade. An aspect that sometimes is not, I think, given sufficient attention is the levels of education of different countries. We all know that well, I didn't know it before the first time I went there to the Caribbean, that they have a very high literacy. I think about 97% of the population is is sufficiently literate. Why education is important is because your marketing communication is has to be pitched at the level that the potential new international market can understand and can relate to, specifically your labeling. I know that very often, and I think it's important that, and it obviously it depends on what products you are exporting or manufacturing and selling overseas. If no instructions is necessary, it's quite simple. You can do a demonstration, and the person will can taste or feel the product, and they will be happy with it. But especially with products that where instructions is important for the correct use of the product, I'd much rather in a foreign country much rather avoid written instructions. I'd much rather use illustrations and diagrams, and you'll see that most products that we find in our country, and you probably have bought something, at least one item this year that came with instructions, and it's the instructions, the written instructions are in all a number of dialects, but there's also sufficient instructions and illustrations, and I think that's probably to ensure that you can use some generic marketing material that is slightly modified for the global market, because if you have to, that's one of the cost items that you'll have in your budget, and carefully look at in your budget when preparing a budget to trade internationally, and that's the cost of your marketing. If you have to modify it slightly, it's fine. If you have to have complete different marketing makeups and marketing communication mixes in different countries, it might not be worth your while to engage in international trade to that particular region. Political factors, we all know, cannot hide from that. And more specifically, because in different countries, the different governmental regulations is inhibiting a lot of effective trade. I think some countries are very strict, and they have their reasons for that can motivate that. But again, it's something that comes at a great cost, and it's one of the important factors to consider before you or when you plan to trade internationally and before you engage in international trade. The example I've used, for instance, in India, certain parts of the economy, certain sectors of the economy is reserved exclusively for government enterprises. I think probably in South Africa exactly the same. That's why we still have Eskom, and there's no competition that provides us with electricity locally, because it was a sector of the economy that was reserved for government enterprise, and that is it puts a great restriction on trading internationally, and it obviously affects your cost when you're planning to trade internationally, and needs to be considered very, very carefully. And then we also know that it will then obviously affect your pricing and your credit policies. The important thing to remember also is, people, that countries are also not going to invest in and open branches in other parts of the world if there's political instability. That's one. And if the international relations between two countries are not great. those are some of the political factors that we have to consider before we trade internationally. I think we can call it a day for this Monday and for this week, the start of this week. Hopefully you do not have another period after this. If you do, good luck. If not, then we will chat again on Wednesday morning, and then we can take it from there. If anybody has any questions at this point, you're more than welcome to ask me, or otherwise just communicate by email, which I've not checked since 11 this morning when I started with classes, but which I'll check when I'm done here. And then the recordings for today's session will be uploaded. And on Wednesday, I'd also like to just do a sort of a check-in and see how we're doing, how we're progressing with assignment 1. If nobody has any questions, I thank you for the session, and we'll chat again on Wednesday.
Thank you so